There are moments in life that shatter the foundation of everything you believe to be true, forcing you to look at the wreckage of your own making. For Giovanni Esposito, a man who ruled the city's criminal underworld with an iron fist and a heart of stone, that moment didn't come from a rival's bullet, a hostile takeover, or a crippling FBI indictment. It came from a frail, shivering, 7-year-old homeless girl staring up at him from the shadows of a rain-soaked alley. When she pointed a dirt-smudged, trembling finger at his chest and uttered 6 simple words, the ruthless Mafia boss broke in a way no prison sentence ever could. This is a story of betrayal, redemption, and the undeniable, transformative power of family. The night was merciless, a torrential downpour that washed the grit and grime of the city into the overflowing storm drains, though it could never wash away the deeper institutional sins woven into the concrete. Neon signs bled their sickly colors into the deep puddles, casting jagged reflections across the asphalt. Giovanni Esposito stood under the leaking awning of a defunct pawnshop, the heavy collar of his tailored midnight blue cashmere coat turned up against the biting, relentless autumn wind. At 62, Giovanni was a man carved from granite. His eyes, a slate, unforgiving gray, had witnessed decades of violence, vicious power struggles, and the quiet, methodical accumulation of an empire built entirely on fear and extortion. He was the head of the Esposito family, the undisputed king of the city's illicit underworld. A man whose mere whisper could alter the skyline. Beside him stood Luca, a mountain of a man with a scarred jawline, whose loyalty to Giovanni was as absolute as his suffocating silence. His dark eyes constantly scanned the rooftops and alleyways, cataloging every shadow. They had just finished a meeting in the soundproofed back room of a nearby nightclub. A substantial debt had been settled. Though not with money, a message had been sent in blood and bruised bone. Yet, as they stepped back out into the freezing rain, Giovanni felt nothing of the victory. He only felt the familiar, cold numbness settling deeper into his chest, a cavernous numbness he had carefully cultivated over 8 long, agonizing years. 8 years since his only daughter, Alessia, had vanished into thin air, taking the last remnants of his humanity and joy with her, leaving behind only an echoing void. As Giovanni reached into his inner pocket to retrieve his silver, monogrammed cigar case, a sudden, frantic movement in the shadows caught his periphery. A small, ragged figure darted from the impenetrable gloom of the alleyway, making a desperate, scrambling grab for the thick gold money clip that had slipped from his pocket and clattered loudly onto the wet pavement. In a flash of pure instinct, honed by a lifetime of paranoia, Giovanni's hand shot out, his grip closing like a steel vise around a tiny, frail wrist. "Let go!" a high, panicked voice shrieked, the sound cutting sharply through the steady drone of the rain. Giovanni looked down, his expression hardening into a scowl. It wasn't a rival foot soldier looking to make a name for himself, or a desperate junkie looking for a quick score. It was a little girl, no older than 7. Her clothes were a mismatched patchwork of oversized, sodden rags that clung to her emaciated frame. Her dark, matted hair was plastered to her pale, hollow cheeks, and her eyes, large, terrified, and startlingly, achingly familiar, stared up at him with the wild, white-rimmed desperation of a cornered animal waiting for the final blow. "Boss," Luca growled, immediately reaching for the heavy pistol holstered at his waist, conditioned to perceive any sudden movement, no matter how small, as a lethal threat. "Stand down, Luca," Giovanni murmured, his voice a low, commanding rumble that instantly halted the bodyguard's movement. He looked back down at the shivering child, slowly easing his crushing grip, but not letting her go entirely. "You have a lot of nerve, little bird, trying to steal from me. Do you know whose pocket you're picking?" As Giovanni leaned down to meet her eye level, his heavy, soaked coat shifted. From beneath his impeccable silk tie, a heavy gold chain slipped free, dangling freely in the negative space between them. At the end of the chain hung a large, intricate locket, a custom, handcrafted piece shaped like a blooming rose, with a single, flawless, deep green emerald set directly in the center. It was a masterwork of jewelry, commissioned by Giovanni 30 years ago for his late wife, Elena, a woman who had been the only light in his dark world. The little girl's frantic, bird-like struggles abruptly ceased. Her chest heaved, but her eyes widened, fixating not on Giovanni's terrifying scarred face, but on the swinging, glittering gold rose. Her breathing hitched in her throat, and a trembling, dirt-smudged finger slowly rose, defying her fear, to point at the jewelry. "My mom has the same locket," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible, a fragile sound fighting against the drumming rain. The air in the alley seemed to instantly turn to ice. Giovanni froze completely, the blood draining rapidly from his face, leaving him ashen. His heart, which had maintained a slow, steady, unbothered rhythm through FBI raids, assassinations, and gang wars, suddenly slammed against his ribs with the terrifying force of a battering ram. "What did you say?" Giovanni's voice was a ragged, breathy whisper, completely devoid of its usual terrifying authority. The Don Esposito mask cracked. "My mom," the girl repeated, swallowing hard, her eyes darting nervously between his stunned face and the precious locket. "She has one just like that, but hers doesn't shine anymore. It's covered in scratches, but she never takes it off." Giovanni's mind reeled, spinning out of control. The locket was one of a kind, or rather, it was one of two. When Elena passed away, Giovanni had taken her locket to wear over his own heart, and he had an exact replica meticulously forged for his teenage daughter Alessia. It was a closely guarded family secret, a physical symbol of their unbreakable, private bond. No one else in the entire world had that design. No one could possibly replicate it. He dropped to his knees right there in the filthy, rain-swept puddle, completely heedless of his expensive Italian suit, soaking up the city's toxic grime. He gripped the girl by her small shoulders, his slate-gray eyes wide with a manic, desperate, intoxicating hope that he thought had died a decade ago. "What is your name?" he demanded, his large hands shaking uncontrollably against her fragile collarbones. "Mia," she squeaked, shrinking back from the terrifying intensity radiating from him. "Mia," Giovanni breathed, his voice breaking. The name hit him like a physical blow. A heavy stone dropped into a still pond. "Mia, where is your mother? Where is she right now?" 10 minutes later, the rain was beating a chaotic rhythm against the plate glass window of Sal's Diner, a greasy, all-night establishment, firmly entrenched under the Esposito family's protection racket. The diner had been abruptly and aggressively cleared of its few late-night patrons by Luca, who now stood guard at the front door with his massive arms crossed, an imposing, immovable sentinel, keeping the harsh night at bay. The flickering neon open sign cast a reddish glow over the empty booths. Inside, sitting in a cracked red vinyl booth near the back, was Mia. Wrapped tightly in Giovanni's enormous, dry cashmere coat, she looked even smaller and more vulnerable than she had in the alley. In front of her sat a towering stack of buttery pancakes, a mountain of scrambled eggs, and a massive mug of hot chocolate topped with melting whipped cream. She ate with a ravenous, heartbreaking intensity, shoveling food into her mouth without pausing for breath, as if she hadn't eaten a full meal in days, which, Giovanni realized with a sickening, twisting knot in his gut, was likely the undeniable truth. Giovanni sat rigidly across from her, a ceramic cup of black coffee untouched and growing cold before him. He watched her every single movement with unblinking intensity. He studied the soft curve of her jaw, the specific shade of her dark, tangled hair, the almond shape of her eyes. The resemblance was undeniable, an absolute biological certainty. It was like looking through a cruel time machine directly at a 7-year-old Alessia. The hardened, ruthless Mafia Don felt a sharp sting, a tear pricking the corner of his eye, a physical sensation so foreign and forgotten, he almost didn't recognize it as crying. "Slow down, Mia. Nobody is going to take it from you." "Take a breath," Giovanni said softly, his voice impossibly gentle, pushing a stack of paper napkins toward her sticky hands. Mia paused mid-bite, her cheeks stuffed full like a chipmunk, and looked up at him warily, still expecting a trick. She swallowed hard, coughing slightly, and wiped her syrup-stained mouth with the back of her ragged sleeve. "Are you a cop?" she asked, her voice suddenly laced with a street-smart, defensive suspicion, that no 7-year-old child should ever possess or need. No, Giovanni replied, a bitter smile touching his lips. I'm a man who is looking for someone he lost a very long time ago. Someone very precious to me. Tell me more about your mother, Mia. Tell me about her locket. Mia carefully wrapped her small, dirt-caked hands around the warm mug of hot chocolate, letting the heat seep into her frozen fingers. She says it's her only treasure in the whole world. She says an angel gave it to her a long time ago, before the monsters came and chased us away. Giovanni flinched visibly. The monsters. He knew all too well the monsters that roamed this city, mostly because he commanded them. What is your mother's name, Mia? Allie, the girl said quietly. But sometimes, when she's really sick and sweating, and she's having bad nightmares, she cries out and says another name. She says, Alessia. She says it over and over. Giovanni closed his eyes, and the last remnants of breath left his lungs in a ragged, shuddering sigh. 8 years. 8 years of agonizing dead ends, of firing expensive private investigators who came up empty, of standing alone on the docks staring at the Black River, wondering if his daughter's body lay rotting at the bottom of it. She was alive. Against all odds, Alessia was alive. Why are you out in the freezing rain by yourself, Mia? Where is Allie? Giovanni asked, leaning forward over the table, his voice a gentle, soothing hum that completely belied the roaring tempest of panic and rage inside him. Mia's gaze dropped to the scarred tabletop, and her lower lip began to tremble violently. She's sick. Really sick. She coughs up blood into rags, and she can't stand up anymore to walk. We don't have money for medicine or food. I was trying to find something, anything I could sell, to buy her soup. Just a little soup. The crushing weight of her words crashed down on Giovanni, physically knocking the wind out of him. His daughter, the beloved heiress to an empire of millions, a girl who grew up surrounded by silk, imported marble, and private tutors, was starving in the gutters of his city, coughing up blood, while he sat in velvet chairs, drinking imported Italian wine. The staggering moral injustice of it felt like a serrated dagger, twisting slowly in his very soul. Take me to her, Giovanni commanded, standing up so abruptly and forcefully that the heavy table shook, rattling the silverware. Mia shrank back into the corner of the booth, terrified by his sudden imposing height. No, I can't. She told me never to bring anyone back to the tent. Ever. She said, bad men are looking for her everywhere. Men who want to hurt us if they find us. Giovanni rounded the table and knelt right there on the greasy diner floor beside the booth, bringing his scarred face level with hers. For the first time in decades, the terrifying Don Esposito completely stripped away his armored mask of power, revealing the broken, desperate, weeping father underneath. Mia, please, look at me, he pleaded, his voice cracking with raw emotion. I swear to you on my life, I will not hurt her. I will protect you both. I am not one of the monsters. I think I'm the angel who gave her that locket. The drive was agonizingly short in distance, yet it felt like navigating an endless, suffocating lifetime to Giovanni. Mia sat securely in the cavernous back of the heavily armored SUV, absolutely dwarfed by the plush leather seats, giving quiet, hesitant directions to a stoic Luca. They drove smoothly past the glittering, pristine skyscrapers of the financial district, past the brightly lit high-end boutiques where Alessia used to spend her afternoons shopping, and descended rapidly into the neglected, rotting underbelly of the city, a desolate place the politicians purposefully ignored, where the streetlights were all broken, and where the police only ventured in heavily armed convoys. They finally pulled up to an abandoned, rusting industrial shipyard positioned directly beneath a crumbling concrete overpass. The area was a sprawling, apocalyptic encampment of pure human misery. Tents fashioned haphazardly from torn blue tarps, discarded wooden pallets, and rusted sheet metal huddled closely together, offering pathetic resistance against the biting wind. The air here was thick, suffocating with the acrid stench of damp rot, burning plastic trash in rusted oil drums, and the profound, heavy scent of total despair. As Giovanni stepped out of the climate-controlled, warm SUV into the freezing, ankle-deep mud. A profound, sickening wave of nausea washed over him. This was the city he proudly claimed to own and rule. He controlled the bustling ports, manipulated the labor unions, and dictated the flow of illicit trades. He had amassed unimaginable, generational wealth by systematically taxing the vices of the desperate, but seeing the raw, unfiltered, visceral suffering of this invisible class firsthand, knowing his own flesh and blood was suffering among them, completely shattered his arrogant illusion of grandeur. He was no king. He was a parasite. "Show me, Mia. Show me where she is," Giovanni said, his voice tight, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. Mia reached out and took his massive, calloused hand. Her small fingers were as cold as ice. She led him carefully through the dark, winding labyrinth of the forgotten. Hollow-eyed shadows shifted nervously, peeking from behind tarps as the towering, imposing figures of Giovanni and Luca passed by in their expensive suits. They reached the far, most desolate edge of the encampment, dangerously close to the polluted, black, churning waters of the river. There, hidden behind a towering, rusted, graffiti-covered shipping container, was a small, dilapidated tent, barely standing, fashioned from heavy-duty trash bags and the frame of a broken patio umbrella. "Mama?" Mia called out softly, her voice trembling as she unzipped the makeshift plastic flap. "Mama, I'm back. I brought someone." A weak, terrible rattling cough echoed deeply from within the darkness of the tent. "Mia, baby, where were you? I told you not to wander. I was so worried." The voice was faint, raspy, and terribly broken, completely stripped of its former vitality. But Giovanni would recognize the underlying cadence of it anywhere. It was the beautiful voice that used to sing happily in his grand, echoing hallways. It was the voice that used to excitedly call him Papa. Giovanni roughly pushed past the plastic flap, dropping immediately to his knees in the squalid, freezing mud. The inside of the tent was brutally cold and smelled intensely of sickness and decay. Lying on a meager pile of damp, flattened cardboard boxes, wrapped tightly in a threadbare, filthy gray blanket, was a woman. Her face was gaunt, her cheekbones jutting out sharp as broken glass, her skin a sickly, translucent pallid gray. Her beautiful, vibrant dark hair, which used to shine like raven feathers, was now matted and dull. But there, resting against her fragile collarbone, gleaming faintly in the dim, flickering orange light of a nearby trash barrel fire, was the heavy gold rose locket with the brilliant emerald center. "Alessia," Giovanni whispered, the word tearing violently from his throat in an ugly, raw sob. The woman slowly turned her head. Her sunken, exhausted eyes struggled to focus in the gloom. When they finally locked onto Giovanni's face, tracing the lines of his jaw and his gray eyes, there was no joyous recognition, no tearful relief of rescue. Instead, her eyes widened to impossible proportions in absolute, primal, unadulterated terror. She shrieked a guttural sound of pure panic and scrambled frantically backward on her hands and knees, pressing her frail, trembling back hard against the freezing corrugated steel of the shipping container. She coughed violently, a wet, terrible sound, as she desperately grabbed Mia, pulling the child behind her body to act as a human shield. "No! No! Please, Papa, no!" Alessia shrieked, her voice cracking with hysterical panic. "I swear I didn't tell anyone. I never said a word to the police. Please, Giovanni, spare her. She's innocent. She's your blood. Kill me. Do what you have to do, but let my daughter go." Giovanni froze entirely, his breath catching in his lungs, as if he had been shot point-blank in the chest with a shotgun. His hands remained outstretched toward her, suspended and trembling violently in the cold air. The reaction was entirely wrong. It completely defied all logic. Why would his beloved daughter think he wanted to execute her? "Alessia, what are you saying? Please, it's me." "It's Papa," Giovanni cried openly, tears now freely streaming down his weathered, scarred cheeks. "I've been looking for you every day for 8 years. I thought you were dead. Why are you running from me?" "Liar," Alessia spat with surprising venom, a bright speck of blood and saliva landing on her chapped lips. "You ordered it. You sent them to kill me. You told Dante to end my life because I fell in love with a civilian. Because you said I shamed the Esposito family." The name hit the freezing air like a concussive bomb. Dante. Dante was Giovanni's loyal underboss, his most trusted, inner circle confidant, the man Giovanni had mentored and treated like a beloved son, the man who was currently managing the vast Esposito family's daily operations while Giovanni grieved. Alessia. Giovanni breathed. A terrifying, razor-sharp clarity, suddenly beginning to pierce through the suffocating fog of his grief. The pieces of an 8-year-old puzzle slammed together in his mind. "Alessia, tell me right now, what did Dante do to you?" The rain hammered a deafening, metallic rhythm against the top of the rusted shipping container as Alessia, shivering uncontrollably beneath the thin blanket, spilled a horrific truth that systematically shattered the bedrock of Giovanni's entire existence. 8 years ago, Alessia had fallen deeply in love with a man named Julian Vance, a young, idealistic public school teacher who volunteered at the local shelters, a man with absolutely no ties to the violent underworld. Knowing her fiercely protective and proud father would never approve of the union, they had made a desperate plan to elope to Europe. Needing help, she had confided only in Dante, the man she considered an older brother, begging him to help her slip away quietly without triggering a manhunt. "I trusted him, Papa," Alessia wept bitterly, clutching a terrified Mia desperately to her chest. "He told me he had fake passports and a charter plane ready, but the night Julian and I were supposed to meet him to leave, Dante didn't come alone. He came with 2 hitmen. They shot Julian. They shot him right in front of me, in the chest, while he begged them to let me go." Giovanni squeezed his eyes shut, a low, guttural, animalistic groan of profound agony escaping his lips. "Dante grabbed me by the hair and held a gun right to my head," Alessia continued, her voice trembling violently with the deeply ingrained trauma of a nightmare she relived every time she closed her eyes. "He told me you ordered the hit. He said you found out I was pregnant. He told me that you couldn't stomach the ultimate disgrace of your pure bloodline mixing with a nobody, a civilian. He said you ordered him to cleanse the family of the rot." "No," Giovanni whispered, the word a desperate pleading prayer. "No, Alessia, I swear to Almighty God, I never." "Dante was going to pull the trigger," Alessia sobbed, rocking back and forth. "But he hesitated," he said. "He said he would give me a 30-minute head start because of the old days, because he practically watched me grow up. But he promised that if I ever showed my face in the city, if I ever tried to contact you or anyone in the family, he would find me and he would personally slaughter my child in front of me. I've been running ever since, hiding in the dirt, moving from camp to camp, because I thought my own father, the most powerful man in the city, wanted us dead." The profound silence that followed her confession was heavier and colder than the raging storm outside. Giovanni looked at his beautiful daughter, now ravaged by untreated disease and chronic starvation, and at his innocent granddaughter, born into the mud, surviving on discarded scraps. They had endured 8 years of unimaginable hell, jumping at every shadow, completely terrified of him, all because of a calculated, sociopathic lie orchestrated by the very man who sat comfortably at his right hand. Why? The motive slammed into Giovanni's mind with brutal, undeniable logic. Dante was endlessly ambitious. While Alessia was alive, she was the true heir. With Alessia gone, permanently out of the picture, Dante naturally became the undisputed successor to the vast Esposito empire. Dante had violently removed the only obstacle in his path to the throne, weaponizing Giovanni's own fearsome, ruthless reputation to keep Alessia terrified and permanently in the shadows. Giovanni slowly stood up, the mud squelching beneath his ruined shoes. The devastating grief on his face hardened, rapidly crystallizing into something far colder, far more dangerous. The weeping, broken father retreated deep inside, and the ruthless, terrifying Mafia boss returned to the surface. But his legendary wrath was no longer aimed at rival families or disloyal politicians. It was aimed entirely inward, at his own house. He methodically unbuttoned his heavy, dry cashmere coat, and gently draped it over Alessia's shivering shoulders, tucking it around her. He then reached to his own neck, unclasped his heavy gold locket, and placed it gently in little Mia's hands, pressing her fingers closed around it. "Luca," Giovanni said, his voice eerily calm, completely devoid of all emotion, a terrifying flatline. "Yes, boss," Luca replied instantly, stepping fully into the tent, his eyes hard as flint, his hand resting on his weapon after hearing the brutal confession. "Call a private, fully equipped ambulance. Use the trusted doctors on our payroll, no hospitals. Take them immediately to the secure safe house in the Berkshires. Set up a perimeter. If anyone so much as looks at them the wrong way, you have my full authorization to burn the city to the ground. It's done. What about you, boss? Do you want an escort?" Giovanni turned back toward the entrance of the tent, looking out into the unforgiving, stormy night, his eyes reflecting nothing but cold fury. "No. I have a tumor to cut out of my family." The Esposito Syndicate operated out of the sprawling top floor of a gleaming, ultra-modern skyscraper downtown, a highly legitimate real estate development firm, serving as a flawless, untouchable front for international gambling, extortion, and narcotics trafficking. At 2:00 a.m., the massive penthouse office was dead quiet, save for the rhythmic, soothing tapping of rain against the reinforced, floor-to-ceiling windows. Dante, a sharply dressed man in his late 40s with perfectly slicked-back dark hair and a custom three-piece Italian suit, sat comfortably behind a sprawling mahogany desk, poring over digital ledgers on an iPad. He was comfortable. He was rich. He was incredibly powerful. He was simply biding his time, ready to take the reins entirely when the grieving, tired old man finally retired or died. The heavy double oak doors to the office swung open silently, without a knock. Dante didn't look up immediately, irritated by the interruption. "I told the guards I didn't want to be disturbed," he snapped, tapping the screen. "I apologize for the intrusion, Dante." Dante's head snapped up, recognizing the voice. Giovanni stood alone in the doorway, absolutely drenched to the bone, his expensive suit ruined and heavy with water, thick mud caking his pristine leather shoes and the hem of his pants. His gray eyes were entirely empty, like dead, black voids in deep space. "Giovanni," Dante said, quickly standing up and buttoning his suit jacket, forcing a respectful smile, attempting to mask his sudden, sharp surprise. "You look terrible. Where is Luca? Where's your detail? What happened?" "I took a walk," Giovanni said softly, stepping fully into the luxurious room. He didn't sit in the plush leather chairs opposite the desk. He moved slowly around the perimeter of the vast office, his mud-stained fingers lightly grazing the luxurious, imported furniture. A long walk through the places we pretend don't exist. The squalid camps under the bridges. Have you ever been down there, Dante? Have you smelled it? Dante frowned deeply, his finely tuned survival instincts screaming that something was fundamentally, terribly wrong. Giovanni never went anywhere without a heavily armed detail, and the Don certainly didn't wander aimlessly through homeless encampments at 2 a.m. "No, boss. We pay the local precincts good money to keep them out of our districts to protect property values." "Why? Was there a problem? Did some junkie try something?" Giovanni stopped by the massive window, looking out over the glittering, sprawling city lights that he controlled. "I found a diamond in the mud tonight, Dante. A very rare, beautiful diamond. An emerald rose." The color drained from Dante's face in a terrifying, instantaneous rush. The silence in the room suddenly stretched, pulling tight like a steel piano wire about to violently snap. Dante's right hand subtly, inch by inch, began to drift toward the slightly open top drawer of his mahogany desk. "I don't know what you mean, Giovanni. You're not making sense. Let me get you a drink." Giovanni turned around slowly. He reached into his wet pocket and pulled out the heavy gold money clip Mia had tried to steal, tossing it casually onto the polished mahogany desk. It landed with a loud, final thwack that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. "She is dying, Dante," Giovanni said, his voice dropping to a demonic, vibrating register that shook the air. "My beautiful little girl is coughing up her lungs in a garbage tent, hiding in terror, because she genuinely thought I sent you to put a bullet in her brain 8 years ago." Dante froze. The jig was up. The masquerade was over. 8 years of careful, meticulous manipulation, of feigned brotherly loyalty, evaporated in a matter of seconds. He looked at Giovanni, and the deferential, respectful underboss vanished, replaced immediately by a cornered, venomous snake ready to strike. She was weak. "Giovanni." Dante barked aggressively, stepping back from the desk, his hand diving rapidly into the drawer, and emerging instantly with a sleek, silenced Glock 19. She was a liability. She was going to run away with a nobody school teacher. She was going to humiliate this proud family. "You were getting soft, old man. You were losing your edge over her. Someone had to make the hard choices to protect the empire." "The empire?" Giovanni roared, the sheer explosive force of his voice rattling the thick glass windows. "This empire is built on rot and suffering. We poison our own streets. We terrorize our own neighborhoods. And for what? For more money we can't spend? For this stupid wooden desk? For absolute power," Dante yelled back, aiming the gun squarely at Giovanni's chest, his hands remarkably steady. "You were going to hand everything we built over to a weak girl who didn't even want it. I earned this family, Giovanni. I bled in the streets for it while she played house. I protected your legacy. You bled my family dry," Giovanni corrected him, his face completely devoid of fear despite the lethal weapon pointed directly at his heart. He took a slow step forward. "You made an innocent child live in the dirt. You aren't a boss, Dante. A boss protects his people. You are just a greedy, pathetic monster. Goodbye, old man," Dante sneered, his finger tightening decisively on the trigger, preparing to take the throne by force. Before the hammer could drop, the thick, reinforced glass window of Dante's office shattered inward with a deafening, explosive crack. A high-powered, armor-piercing sniper round, fired perfectly from the adjacent rooftop, tore brutally through Dante's firing shoulder. The immense kinetic impact spun the underboss completely around like a rag doll, his gun firing wildly, putting a silenced hole into the ceiling plaster as he collapsed heavily to the plush, imported carpet with an agonizing scream. Giovanni hadn't come to the tower entirely alone. Before entering the building, he had called in Marco, a fiercely loyalist sniper from the old days who answered only to the dawn, positioning him across the street to watch the office windows. Giovanni walked slowly, deliberately, toward the writhing, bleeding Dante. He stood silently over him, looking down with cold detachment at the man who had stolen 8 irreplaceable years of his life and nearly killed his bloodline. He reached smoothly inside his coat and pulled out his own sidearm, a heavy, chrome-plated 1911. He racked the slide with a metallic clack that sounded like a death knell. Dante looked up, his face pale and sweaty, desperately clutching his shattered, bleeding shoulder, his eyes wide with absolute terror. "Giovanni, please. We're brothers. We built this entire city together. I was only thinking of the family." Giovanni aimed the heavy barrel of the gun directly at Dante's forehead. An intense, raging conflict warred within him. This was the undisputed law of his world. Blood for blood. An eye for an eye. Treason was paid for with death. Pulling this trigger was the easiest thing in the world. It was what the terrifying Don Esposito had done 100 times before to lesser men for lesser crimes. But as his finger rested heavily on the curved metal trigger, a vivid vision flashed brilliantly in his mind. He saw little Mia's large, terrified eyes looking up at him in the alley. He saw Alessia, shrinking away from him, trembling in the dirt, consumed by the endless cycle of violence and retribution that he had championed his entire adult life. If he executed Dante right here, right now, he was just validating the terror Alessia had run from. He would prove her right. He would remain the blood-soaked monster in her nightmares forever. The moral injustice of it all settled heavily upon his broad shoulders. His vast criminal empire wasn't a kingdom to be ruled. It was a dark prison cell he had built for himself. Giovanni exhaled a long breath and slowly, deliberately, lowered the gun. "Killing you in cold blood is exactly what Don Esposito would do," Giovanni said quietly, his voice finally finding a strange sense of peace. But Don Esposito died tonight in a filthy alleyway. He broke when he saw what he had become. Giovanni reached into his pocket and pulled out his heavily encrypted cell phone. He dialed a memorized 10-digit number he had sworn to himself he would rather die than ever use. It was the direct, secure line to Agent Miller, the head of the FBI task force that had been relentlessly hunting him, trying to build a RICO case against him for 2 decades. "Agent Miller," Giovanni said calmly, keeping his eyes fixed on the bleeding Dante. "This is Giovanni Esposito. Yes, I'm serious. I'm standing in my penthouse office with my underboss, Dante, who has just freely confessed to the murder of Julian Vance 8 years ago. I have a master encrypted ledger sitting on this desk detailing every illegal operation, every paid-off judge, and every murder the Esposito family has committed in the last 20 years. I am surrendering myself unconditionally, and I am dismantling my entire organization tonight. Bring everyone." Dante stared up at him from the blood-soaked carpet in absolute, uncomprehending shock. "You're crazy. You'll die in a federal supermax prison. You're burning everything we built to the ground over a girl." "I'm not burning it down, Dante," Giovanni said, a profound, undeniable sense of peace washing over his weary soul for the first time in his entire life. "I'm finally washing it clean." Giovanni dropped the chrome 1911 onto the desk, stepped carefully over Dante's writhing form, and walked to the leather couch, sitting down quietly to wait for the distant sound of approaching sirens. 6 months later, the summer sun was shining brightly, casting golden rays over a sprawling, highly secluded, heavily forested estate in the lush, green hills of the Berkshires. The air here was pristine and clean, smelling sharply of pine needles and blooming wildflowers, feeling completely, utterly detached from the suffocating smog, violence, and grit of the city. In the expansive green backyard, little Mia was happily chasing a clumsy golden retriever puppy across the manicured lawn. She was wearing a bright, cheerful yellow sundress, her cheeks full, rosy, and healthy. The haunting hollow shadows of the alleyway, the lingering trauma of the tents, had been completely erased from her bright eyes. Around her neck, bouncing joyfully as she ran, was the heavy gold emerald locket catching the sunlight. Sitting comfortably on the wide wraparound porch, wrapped in a thick, beautifully knit shawl, was Alessia. The color and life had finally returned to her face. She was still recovering, undergoing intense, daily physical therapy and rigorous medical treatments to combat the years of neglect, but the suffocating darkness had finally lifted from her spirit. She was smiling, a genuine radiant smile, simply watching her daughter laugh freely. The heavy sliding glass door opened, and Giovanni stepped out onto the sunlit porch, carrying a wooden tray with 2 steaming cups of herbal tea. He looked entirely different, almost unrecognizable. The expensive, intimidating, dark-tailored suits were gone forever, replaced by a simple, soft beige sweater and comfortable khakis. The slate-gray, terrifying coldness in his eyes had melted away entirely, replaced by a warm, gentle, contented weariness of a man who had survived a lifelong war. Through an unprecedented, massive federal plea deal, Giovanni had traded his entire sprawling empire, surrendered his vast wealth built on decades of crime, and traded his ultimate freedom for the total dismantling of his syndicate and the guaranteed safety of his family. He had provided enough evidence to lock away hundreds of corrupt officials and mobsters. He had been placed under strict, permanent federal house arrest at this secluded estate, stripped of all his underworld titles, and constantly monitored by government cameras. But he was completely free to be with the family he thought he had lost forever. Dante was currently serving multiple, consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The Esposito crime family was no more. It was merely a ghost story. Giovanni set the tray down carefully on a small wicker table and sat in a rocking chair beside Alessia. She leaned over warmly, resting her head gently on his broad shoulder. He wrapped his strong arm around her, kissing the top of her dark hair. "She runs fast. She's going to tire that poor dog out," Giovanni chuckled softly, watching Mia dramatically trip, roll safely into the soft grass, and erupt into a fit of breathless giggles as the puppy licked her face. "She's resilient. Alessia said softly, reaching up to squeeze her father's hand. She's tough, just like her grandfather. Giovanni looked down at his large, calloused hands resting in his lap. They were no longer the bloody hands of a ruthless mafia boss. They were just the hands of an old man who had finally, miraculously found his way back home. He had willingly traded a dark empire built on fear for a small, quiet kingdom built on love. He had lost the entire underworld, but he had won back his whole world. He reached into the collar of his sweater. Resting warmly against his chest, beating in time right over his heart, was the matching gold rose locket. He closed his eyes, inhaling the sweet pine air, listening to the beautiful, unburdened sound of his granddaughter's laughter, carrying on the gentle summer wind, knowing that, finally, his true legacy was completely safe.